Hey, I get it standing in front of that old water heater, wondering if it's finally time to upgrade, and then the whole heat pump water heater thing starts sounding like a mystery box. You're probably weighing the risk of spending a few $100 only to end up with a unit that never quite hits the temperature you need, or worse, a system that just makes a lot of noise and eats electricity. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I've been digging through the basics of how these heat pump units work, scrolling through a handful of buyer comments, and even looking at a few installation forums to see what real homeowners are saying after they've lived with the gear for a season or two. First off, let's talk about why a heat pump water heater feels different from the classic gas or electric tank you might be used to. Instead of heating water directly with an electric element, it pulls heat from the surrounding air, moves it into the tank, and then releases cooler air back into the room. In theory, that means lower operating costs because you're basically recycling heat that would otherwise be wasted. The Stiebel Eltron Accelera 220E is the brand's answer to that idea, sized at 58 gallons, which puts it in the sweet spot for a family of 3 to 4 people who need a decent amount of hot water for showers, dishes, and the occasional laundry load. Now, who should actually consider this unit? If you live in a climate that stays above about 40 F most of the year, you'll get the biggest efficiency wins. The temperature range it offers, 42 to 108 F, means it can comfortably keep water warm even when the house is a bit chilly, but you'll start seeing the fan run more often to pull enough heat from the air. That's why the Accelera 220E comes with a heavy-duty quiet fan and a redesigned airflow system. They're there to make sure the unit can still pull heat efficiently without sounding like a ceiling fan on turbo. So, a homeowner in a moderate climate who can dedicate a little attic or garage space for the unit, and who isn't super sensitive to a low hum, is a prime candidate. On the flip side, if you're in a region that drops into the 30s or lower for a good chunk of the year, you might find the unit working harder than you'd like, and that can bump up your electricity bill enough to offset the savings you were hoping for. Also, because the unit needs a dedicated 240V circuit and a 15A breaker, you'll have to make sure your electrical panel can handle it. That's a hidden trade-off many first-time buyers overlook. Running a new circuit or upgrading a breaker is an extra cost and a little bit of a hassle if you're not comfortable pulling a permit and calling an electrician. One of the practical strengths that shows up when people actually install the Accelera 220E is the digital display. It isn't just a blinking light. You get a clear readout of the tank temperature and can adjust it within that 42108F window. That kind of precision is useful if you like to fine-tune your water temperature for energy savings. Dropping it a few degrees when you're not using much hot water can shave off a noticeable amount of electricity over a month. Plus, the display makes troubleshooting a bit easier because you can see if the unit is stuck in a standby mode or if it's actively heating. Another point that matters in real life is the size of the tank. At 58 gallons, you're looking at roughly a full day's worth of showers for a typical family, assuming each person takes a 10-minute shower with a moderate flow rate. The unit's capacity also means you won't run out of hot water mid-shower, even if you have a second bathroom running a bath at the same time. That's a clear advantage over smaller heat pump models that sometimes leave you with lukewarm water after a few back-to-back showers. But there are a few practical weaknesses you should be aware of before you click Add to Cart. First, the unit's fan, while marketed as quiet, does produce a low level where they can be heard in an adjacent room if your installation spot is directly against a living space. In my research, a few homeowners mentioned moving the unit to a garage or a finished basement to keep that noise out of the bedroom. Second, the initial cost is higher than a standard electric tank. Even with the long-term savings, you have to be comfortable with that upfront outlay. Third, the heat pump's efficiency drops when the ambient temperature is low. So during a cold snap, you might notice the water temperature dipping slightly until the unit catches up. That's not a failure, just a characteristic of the technology. Installation is another area where the Accelera 220E can trip up a DIY enthusiast. The unit is fairly heavy because of the stainless steel tank and the built-in fan assembly, so you'll need at least 2 people to lift it safely into.